All right, I think I'm gonna get going. So my name is Nabeel. And so I did this talk it was one of those things where I noticed there's a lot of smart people in the industry, right? And so I have these internships and they kind of ask me, they're like, how'd you get all these internships? Are you super smart? Are you are you crazy at data structures? Are you crazy at TCP IP? All that stuff. And something I tell them is that that's not the case. I'm just pretty good at talking and I'm not that good at school. And so I kind of want to make this talk in appreciation of that thing. And so we're going to kind of talk about internships. Are they better than school? And kind of have you been lied to? Because I mean, all my parents like growing up where they were kind of like, oh, you need to do really good in school. Make sure you get a 4.0 and you got to do all this. And I didn't do that stuff. And I think I've turned out pretty well. So this presentation was made by me, made with love. So let's get into it. So on my agenda, I've got kind of a who am I / my journey. So why you should trust the guy who's yapping up here. And so the second thing we're going to talk about is internships, and that's going to be everything about internships from A to Z. It's going to be kind of high level. I don't want to get too in depth with it, but I know a lot of people wonder how to get one, what even is one. So we'll talk about that a little bit. School, and so the main thing I say is you want to focus less and prioritize more. And I know that sounds bad right now, but once we get into it, it'll start making a little more sense. And then finally, we're going to talk about some conclusions and kind of wrap up and talk about what I just talked about. So who am I? The Nab, that's what people call me, that's my nickname. My full name is Nabeel, but Nab is kind of cooler, so I go by that sometimes. So my name is Nabeel Sohail. I'm 21 and a half years old. I go to DePaul University in Chicago, go Blue Demons. My major is cybersecurity, and my minor is computer science. And so I've interned at 4 companies in 5 years, technically not like 4.5, but so the first one was Gate 3, the second one was Aldi, the grocer. Third one was Discover, the credit card company, and the fourth one was National Futures Association. And I also got an offer from Ford in the summer of 2023, so that was cool. Some of my hobbies include cats, cars, walks, and thrifting. So that photo you see right there are my 3 cats. They're all boys. I got them recently. So the one on the bottom, the orange one, he's the most recent. His name's Pablo. The one above him is named Floof. And then the one to the left of him is Tony. That's my favorite one because he has like a little mustache, but you're going to see him throughout the presentation, so it's not as boring. So it's just going to be like really funny photos of him randomly, so be ready for that. So my journey started at Goodwill. I actually got that photo and it said something worse than amazing place, so I had to change it like last second. But I started there in June of 2019, and I was a part-time donation attendant. And I'm really big on pay transparency just because it helps everybody kind of get a grasp of what they should be getting paid and whatnot. So I was paid like $8.75 an hour or something like that. I think I was getting like 300 biweekly or something, one of those jobs. And I'd sifted through an ungodly amount of just trash and nasty things like that. I went triple gold in lifting furniture and pricing it accordingly. So back then, I don't know if they do it anymore in Illinois, but we had to bring in furniture and take in basically anything we could. And so I was kind of the guy in charge of pricing it, so that was kind of cool. I lifted a ton and lifted it in and out. And I learned a lot about people as a young man because it was interesting. I was kind of like a bratty teenager, but I was like, what's the worst job that I could do? and obviously get paid and whatever. But so I took this donation attendant job, and it was pretty bad. But I learned kind of how people react to things, how people donate things, and overall just kind of how people feel towards others. So it was really good, honestly. Like I know I say it was kind of like horrible, but it was one of those gigs where like if you're starting off, I would definitely go back in a heartbeat. It was so much fun. So from there, the school year started, my senior year of high school. And so I ended up getting this internship at a small IT consulting boutique firm called Gate 3. I was paid $0.00 an hour. And so this internship was almost kind of handed to me, so I don't want to take too much credit, but it was a new class that they were testing out for career exploration. So I ended up taking that, and I was plugged in with somebody who owned the company, and they were like, hey, we could take you on. So that was super cool. I was 17 at the time, I believe, and one of the main things I did was just bother everyone constantly. I would literally go into people's cubicles and be like, what are you working on? And just like kind of look over their shoulder and really try to figure out what was going on. And that was one of those things where I really had to put myself out there because I was kind of shy at that time. So it was one of those things where I was like, I have to go and I have to just tell people and just be direct with them. So I was kind of getting direct there. Two of the cool things that I did was I made an Ethernet cable from scratch. So he kind of just gave us the box with like the blue wire and a couple of other things. And he's like, all right, just put this together. He was a super hands-on guy. So I did that. And then the second one, which is like super prevalent now, which I didn't think was a big deal back then, I analyzed ransomware. So he gave us like one of his old laptops, and he was like, I put some ransomware on here, go figure it out. It was me and a partner. And yeah, he just had us go through like logs and kind of stuff like that and really document every single part of the process, which I'm super grateful for. And it was one of those experiences where I kind of started to realize that this is where I maybe should start to go and kind of explore more into it. Because growing up, I was kind of like tier one for my parents, kind of similar to a lot of people here. Is like one of those things where it's like, the Wi-Fi is off, can you turn it on? Yeah, sure, I'll reset the router. And they would think you're like super cool for that or whatever. But yeah, so I started off there, but this kind of environment, I was like, wait, you could do this as a gig and it would be really cool. So went there. Target, this is the worst part of my journey. So this was from December 2019 to August 2020 when I was a part-time style consultant. I was paid $13 an hour originally and then got a raise to like $15. And then I got an 8-cent raise after that, so it was $15.08 an hour. And it was your very stereotypical retail experience. It was kind of putting back clothes, dealing with customers, getting yelled at by management for petty things. That was kind of a constant. They made me push carts a lot as punishment. So I was originally in like the style department, but when it got like cold out and stuff, they would put me out to do carts. And I was also not old enough to use the cart machine at the time, so that was crazy. But it was absolutely abysmal. And it was one of those things that I could go on and on about on why it was terrible. I was super grateful to have a job during the pandemic, but it was, oh man, I would never go back. But from here, things looked up. I ended up leaving retail, I believe, in August or December of the previous year. And then I got to Aldi in June. So I was a full-time summer and then part-time throughout the school year data center / cybersecurity intern at Aldi USA. I was paid $20 an hour, and it was kind of my first taste on how corporations work. Because, I mean, Gate 3 was a much smaller company, so it was more tight-knit, but this was one of those things where it was like, you have to finish it right now, or you have to do this right now, and you have to talk a specific way. You have to talk the talk, essentially. So that was really cool. And it was one of those things where I remember getting the call, and I was with my mom, and I was like, this is it. Like, I've broken into IT, and it was super cool. It was super emotional, and I can't thank the people enough who recruited me, and they accepted me. And it was one of those things where I didn't have much to show for my experience other than the Gate 3 experience. So they were taking on a lot, and especially with data centers, because that's their servers essentially. So like they're trusting me to pull cables out and act like I know what I'm doing. So that was really cool. And then Discover was the next one. So I did Aldi for a year, and then I moved on to Discover. I was a full-time cybersecurity analyst intern there on the Insider Threat Program. And so this was a nice paycheck for sure. It was $33 an hour plus free corporate housing at Homewood Suites. And the coolest part about that was like, obviously all the interns were there, so we were all having fun, but they let us keep the hotel points. So you would like register with Hilton, yeah, and so I'm like a platinum member or whatever it is. So that's super cool. I could use that later. And so this was also constantly hands-on, and it was an amplified version of my experience at Aldi. And so I say that because it's a much bigger company, first of all, and then second of all, like they had me going team to team a lot and kind of almost interrogating the team on insider risks because it was a new program. So it was kind of like, are you sure you have insider risks? No, I think we do. I think you do. And so it was this nice back and forth corporate lingo stuff. But it was a lot of fun events. The emerging talent team really wanted to kind of butter us up. So they took us on that boat cruise right there. That was super cool. And a bunch of other things. They always kind of took care of us. And I realized here that this was where I wanted to be. Like cybersecurity was the thing that I wanted to do. And I did get some kind of imposter syndrome at first. And I was like, oh man, maybe, these people are so much smarter than me and they've done so much. But kind of as I went on, I was like, wait, I kind of, maybe I do know what I'm doing and maybe this is where it is. And so recently, this was when I just finished up in December 2023. I was a part-time IT security compliance intern at National Futures Association. I was 22 an hour, and I negotiated that up from 20. And so this was mostly second line work, I'd like to call it, because there's consistent checks and balances between the security team and operations. It was very process-oriented and documentation-focused, so anything I wanted to do, I'd have to read through papers and stuff like that. And this is where I really started to become confident in my abilities and like could not believe the things I was allowed to do. And I wasn't doing anything crazy, but it was one of those things where I'd always go to my manager and I was like, are you sure you want me to press this vendor and ask why their SOC 2 is bad? And he's like, yeah, I mean, you work here, so that was super cool. But next off, that's a little bit about me. We're gonna talk about internships now. So what is an internship? An internship is a paid or unpaid opportunity for students, keyword, to learn about their respective field and work in the industry. And so these typically last 8 to 12 weeks. I've seen maybe 13, 14 weeks sometimes if it's super rare. The most common time these are hosted is summer, and then they've got winter and spring ones too, which you could look into. They're available for students anywhere from high school all the way to like PhD students. So that's something I didn't know when I was in high school. I knew kind of the Gate 3 thing, but I didn't know you could also do it like sophomore or junior, all those years. And they typically have a final project and a presentation. So my final project at Discover was risk rating and coming up with scenarios. And then my final project at Aldi was a super cool kind of GUI for the carts. I came up with this idea to put a screen on the carts. And so I kind of designed that, and it was super cool. You work closely under teammates and other mentors, so typically they'll assign you kind of a main guy who's in charge of you besides your manager and kind of take you under their wing almost, and you just shadow them. And it's kind of low stakes, I want to call it, and it's an intro to corporate, so you can mess up here and not have repercussions. That sounds really bad now that I just think I say it, but yeah, you could kind of mess up, and they're like, okay, we understand you're learning. And the coolest part is you get a return offer to work full time once you graduate, if you're good. So that is really cool. It's kind of like a gateway into getting into the industry even further. And this was something I actually had to research so there's an internship, there's a co-op, and there's an apprenticeship. So pretty much the main things I could come up with them is the interns are short. It's usually like one season. A co-op is the whole year, and then an apprenticeship is like, it's long. It's usually 1 to 3 years. You kind of are under the company at that point. So an intern is the most well-known route. Co-ops are kind of low-key. You kind of have to look for them and really search for co-ops. And then apprentices, I don't know much about them, but they're pretty unknown. I'm sure there's some really good apprentice programs out there, but I rarely see them. I think I saw an all-state one recently, which was kind of cool. Okay, cool. So how do you start with internships? So the first thing, and these are things I did right when I started too, kind of freshman year around that time. Personal branding is really, really important. You want to do LinkedIn, GitHub, websites, CTFs, and GitHub websites and a CTF stuff is something I'll touch on later, but that's not something I did, but I highly, highly recommend it. And you want to kind of work to get your name out there via, work accomplishments or educational milestones and all that stuff. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Like if you get like a cool cert or something like that, or if you go to some event like this, like just post it. Like there's nothing really bad that can happen. I know people get real worried about that and kind of what people are going to think about them, but the point is to show that you're passionate about it. We'll touch on that a little bit more too. But your resume, that's obviously really, really important. And this is another thing that people overthink a lot, and I kind of get it. You could start off with like a Harvard template because they have all of them. You could just search up like really good resume template. You could use that, and it's supposed to be kind of boring. It's like all the way down, but yeah, that's a really good way to start. And you want to match it to the career job description if possible. I know a lot of people are kind of putting their resumes literally directly with the kind of job title, so that's really important, and you want to get all the responsibilities in there. So you should have like a couple versions of your resume, if that makes sense. And like I said, don't be afraid to flex. Everything is progress. So a lot of people I talk to, a lot of students, they're like, yeah, I made this Python program automating something. I don't know if it's cool enough. And it's like, dude, I've never done that. Like, that's super cool. And people love discounting themselves because they think they're not in the right place or whatever. But I say, don't be afraid to do that. Like, anything is really cool. Like, especially for people that love this field. Like, even just automating something in Python, cybersecurity, is like, oh my God, this dude made a keylogger or like a Python script to, scan ports. That's super cool. And then you want to network. So you want to connect, reach out, and listen. Go to events kind of like this one. And so a nice app that I use for that is Meetup. I think it's pretty old, but I recently found out about it. And there's a lot of cybersecurity communities depending on where you are, so you could get into those. Find folks who have your dream title and talk to them. And we're going to touch on a little bit more of that later, is like, what is your dream title? But feel free to add them on LinkedIn and say, hey, you're really cool. How did you get here? And a lot of people like being complimented in that sense and want to tell you about their story, especially if they love their job. So that is something you definitely want to go and take advantage of. Find recruiters, ask them what they might be looking for, maybe like a resume review. So something I do a lot at events is if there's hiring managers there, I'll ask if they're a hiring manager at their booth. And if they say yes, I'll be like, hey, here's my resume. Can you review it real quick? And people thought that was crazy when I first did. And I was like, wait, yeah, I mean, that's what they do. That's kind of their job. So kind of being there and telling them, hey, here's my resume. What do you think about it? And it's kind of almost like a way to get into, because they have to read your resume at that point. So you kind of tell them, hey, this is what I do. So, and shoot your shot. So I have a funny story about that for a BMW internship I applied for. It was for the fall of 2023, and it was an IT analyst internship, and I applied. So I searched up the head of recruiting on LinkedIn, and I sent her this message, and I'm like, I'm honestly just being bold here. I'm telling you I applied for this position. And then something clever that I did was I drive a BMW. It's an older BMW. It's a 96. And I told her, I was like, I kind of want to sweeten the deal here. I use a BMW. I have a BMW. So I sent her a picture of it, and I was like, this is not going to work. This is so stupid. And she messaged me back on LinkedIn like a day later, and she's like, I love your BMW. I'm going to fast track you to the hiring manager. And I was like, that's insane. Like, that shouldn't have worked. But yeah, I mean, so that worked out really well. I ended up getting an interview. So that's what I mean by shoot your shot. Like I said, be creative with it. Don't be afraid. Obviously, don't harass recruiters. That's terrible. But kind of go in there and say, like, hey, I applied, or hey, here's my resume. Here's my personal branding. Like, feel free to tell them. That's a random picture of my cat that I put as the background. So passion is something that I preach a lot. Cybersecurity is one of those fields where it's real technical in nature, and I honestly think you kind of have to be a little bit odd to like it. When you put it in the sense of like, I love, combing through Splunk logs or something like that, or I love kind of looking for abnormalities in a network. It sounds weird, and so you kind of, and that goes for everything, right? Because I talk to a lot of CS students too, and a lot of people are like, oh, I just want to code for the money, and it's like, all right, but do you want to sit around for 8 hours and try to find a semicolon in a wrong spot, or do you want to kind of go through stuff like that? And so most of the people that are passionate about it say, yeah, but people don't think that far typically. And recruiters also look for passion. A lot of the ones I've talked to here are kind of just like, yeah, like we want to see that you like this stuff. And so you're not going to get far if you're just in it for the money. And I understand why people get in it for the money, but it's really one of those things that you just want to love. Like you have to be passionate about it. And there's no shame in it, right? Like everybody here is probably passionate about cybersecurity. It's cool. It's a fun thing. So everybody here is in the right spot. And you always want to keep that in mind. And it's something I'm going to emphasize throughout this whole talk. So we're going to talk a little about the application process. So big companies are typically launched far in advance. So I've seen like 2025 internships come out, 2026 internships come out. And they're only from like 6 months to like a year out. So they go really way out. And they're very active around September and December for the summer. So you want to keep an eye out. And then smaller companies are typically on a rolling basis, and they kind of get closer to summer and higher. So those are posted anytime, and you want to set your alerts accordingly. And so what I mean by that is like typically on like LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, kind of the ones that I mentioned down there, you can set kind of notifications for an internship. And so you want to do that, and you want to set them accordingly to kind of what you want. And then, yeah, like I said, like all those, like Indeed, Glassdoor, InfoSec/jobs, Discord groups, your friends, cousins, dog, any of those, you just want to get your application out there, and you want to get your face out there. You want to apply everywhere. And this is something I didn't do, but I highly recommend because I don't know why I didn't do it. But you want to keep track in like a simple spreadsheet. And then this is the last one, it's really important. It's kind of what I touched on a little bit, is you want to follow up. So a lot of people kind of send out those applications and they're kind of like, oh, well, if I get picked, cool. If I don't, then whatever. But you want to actually try and call or get in touch with somebody who's able to look at that thing. Because like I said, then they have to kind of look at your application too. But it's also one of those things where it's like, I've gotten a few interviews just by calling and they're like, oh my God, thank you so much for calling. Like, when can you interview? And it sounds so fake to me because it's crazy, but yeah, that's how things work. So I highly recommend just search up the company name, call them, and it's typically like an operator, and you're like, hey, can I just get in touch with HR or like a talent acquisition person, and go from there. So the interview process is typically you start off with, well, this is kind of rare, but a pre-technical assessment. So there's like hacker rank coding questions, and it's usually like SQL or working with APIs and stuff like that. It's usually not too bad. And then it's the first contact. So this is usually done by phone or email, and it's done by either a recruiter or HR. And it explains the program and kind of gauges who you are as a person. Nothing crazy, kind of just like, why'd you get into cybersecurity, or what are you doing? And then there's a behavioral. So kind of tell me about a time when you did this, or tell me what you would do in this scenario. And there's a STAR method, which I'll get into a little bit more. And then the technical, this is something that people are really scared about, but I'll dumb it down a little bit better. So that's like hypotheticals, terms, processes, CIA, TCP, all that jazz. And then the last one, I really hate this, I wanted to put it in there, but there's some companies that do like games and like video AI interviews and stuff like that. I've never gotten through on any of those. I mean, I've played the games and I've done the video AI interviews. I think they're really dumb because it's kind of like a one-way thing. You're talking to somebody and you never hear back from them. So I'm super against those. But this is an example of a pre-technical. So this is the one that I did for Discover. Super nervous when I did it, but when I ended up jumping into it, it was not that bad, and it was 90 minutes. So, and then this is an example of first contact. This is all these virtual meet and greets. So this was something where I just met with a recruiter on Teams, and they kind of just did it for like, I think like, it says an hour, but I'm sure it was like 30 minutes. Like it wasn't even that much. And then this is another example of first contact. This was kind of literally right off the rip. I was like, tell us everything about this stuff. So I did that with Capital One. So more on behaviorals is they're really underrated, and people don't take them really serious because it's kind of like they have to do it. But if you perfect your elevator pitch in this part, it's golden. So you have to keep kind of under a minute. And what would you say to the CEO if you were in an elevator with them? So every time I give my elevator pitch, it's one of those things where I answer all the questions that I think they're going to have. And so it's one of those things, right? And it's usually met with like, oh, wow, that's pretty much all I was going to ask you. And so you really want to kind of wow them and kind of talk about who you are and where you came from. And then that STAR method I mentioned, it's situation, task, action, and result. So it's kind of just a framework of thinking. I don't use it, but it's really common. They give you a situation, it's a task, and then you kind of give the action and the result kind of thing. And it's very easy to practice beforehand and prepare responses for this. Like I said, I mean, they're kind of similar across the board. So if you want to practice, you could search up or just think about, hey, like, what did I do in this scenario? Or think back to your previous experiences. And then more on technicals. Depending on the company and competition, these can be anywhere from non-existent to like extremely difficult. So like one of the really hard ones I know that I almost got to was the Capital One Power Day. So this is 4 hours of interviews. They fly you out to one of the locations, and it's back-to-back interviews for behaviorals, technical, and a case study. And it's, like I said, it's 4 hours. They just throw you into all of it. And I know like Google and Meta and stuff like that have really hard interviews. And then kind of the middle ground of that is just hypotheticals, definitions, and specific concepts. So it's nothing like where you have to think really logically, but it's something that you should probably know, if that makes sense. And then the last one's non-existent, which I've also been through, where they kind of just don't ask you and they kind of just do the behavioral. So some of the common questions I've been asked is, what's the difference between TCP and UDP? And I've gotten this wrong twice, unfortunately, because I don't do my research real well, but that's a really common one, so don't get that one wrong. The situational one is kind of like, a company received a phishing email. What's the next thing to do here? What's the 7-layer OSI model and how does it help in IT? That's a big one. And then what's the CIA triad and how does it relate to cybersecurity? That was one of those that they actually asked me at Capital One when I first got a call. So that was a big one. And like I kind of say, it's about passion, right? So if you pay attention in your classes and listen to podcasts and read books, you'll be fine. Typically, it's like I said, it's high-level overview, so they don't go really in depth depending on where you're interviewing. But if you read about this stuff and you know it, and I'm sure some of you guys do outside research on it, you will be fine. And this is a little picture that I got of my cat. I always act like he's my son because he searches up. I like search this up for him, obviously. He didn't search it up, but it's really funny because it's like the ultimate guide to, yeah, it's stupid. Oh my God. So this is the secret sauce, right? Somebody's like, oh, I did all this stuff and I still didn't get an internship. And this is something I tell everybody is be human in your interviews. I hate that people are really smart because they just have the concepts, but they don't know. And this is kind of harsh, but everybody has the cool skill set, but not everybody has a likable personality. And so you want to get in that interview, and people are so afraid to do this, but crack jokes or talk about the weather. And something I did recently was I asked about if they like cats or dogs better at the end of my interview. That was just something I did. And so another funny story about my Discover interview is, for my second round, I did it with a cybersecurity engineer, and it was a behavioral, so it wasn't that bad. But at the end of it, he's like, hey, do you have any questions for me? And so I asked a little bit. I was like, what does the best cybersecurity engineer at this firm do? And stuff like that. But something I followed up with, and this was just something I noticed in the interviews, he had a set of cages behind him and a set of kind of like stuff like that. And I was like, I have to ask, I'm so sorry, but what are those cages behind you? And I'm not even joking, for the next 30 minutes, this guy rambled on about his hamster sanctuary. And he's like, yeah, we're bringing like 3 more in, and they've got like no legs, and it's crazy. Like, me and my wife rescued them. And I was like, oh man, that's super cool. And so another one for Aldi, this is the final round interview, and at the end, I kind of asked the IT manager, I was like, what do you do in your free time? And he goes, oh, I DJ. And I'm into, EDM music, so I was like, dude, there's no way. I've been listening to that forever. So at the last 10 minutes of that interview, we're talking about him DJing and stuff like that. So I think stuff like that definitely propels you, because it's one of those things where if you want to work on a team, you want somebody technical, but you also want somebody who could kind of chat it up with, you know what I mean, and have a good working experience. So that's super important. And I think it's really good for interns especially, because it's one of those things where they're investing in you, so they want to invest in a good person. And then, like I said, follow up consistently. So call after a few days you apply and see if they got your application, so they have to go into the portal and check. And then call after a week of the interview and ask if they need anything else from you. So this is just kind of one of those things where it's like, hey, I know we interviewed, hopefully you remember me. Is there anything else I could do for you? And this last one is really important, and I mention it because it's one of those things. Luck is really important. Sometimes you could be the best candidate, you could give the best interview, but maybe it just wasn't your day, or maybe they overlooked you, and it's sad to say, right? Like, it's kind of almost human error, but it happens. You could get lucky and you could get unlucky. So my personal experience, I kind of touched on it a little bit. Aldi, I had 4 interviews. So this was cold apply after I quit retail. My first was the recruiter, then manager, then a director, and then another manager because they didn't know where to put me. And it was all behavioral, so it was fine. Discover was also cold apply, and this was, I keep touching the thing, but so Discover was 3 interviews. And so I cold applied. They sent me a hacker rank pre-technical. My first was with a recruiter, and then an engineer. That was the one with the hamsters, and then a manager. So that one was extremely technical, and it was everything I mentioned, kind of scenario analysis, terms, all that jazz. And then National Futures Association, that was 2 interviews. And so that was awesome because the recruiter reached out via LinkedIn and was like, hey, we have this opportunity. I was like, yeah, I would love that opportunity. Thank you so much. And so first I did it with our recruiter, and then it was just with a manager. And that was really cool too because it was behavioral, and we kind of just talked about previous companies and whatnot and who I am as a person. So touching on school now, this is the really important part, and I'm going to ramble on a little bit here and yap, so be ready for that. So I'm not a big hater of school. A lot of people are either one side or the other, and they're like, oh, school sucks, or school's really good. I mean, it's got its pros and cons, right? So the pros, I think, are that it shows consistency in the sense that you have to show up every day, not to classes, but you kind of have to turn things in and kind of have some degree of learning in that. So DePaul's 10 weeks, so you have to be consistent for 10 weeks minimum. And you have an ability to connect with people very smart in academia. And this is something I realized recently because I've been talking to some of my professors, and some of these guys are really, really, really smart. They've got research papers out there. They've done everything in the field. They could give you really good insights that you might not find in other places. So you want to take advantage of that. Learning things and growing cultural capital. So this is one of those things that it's like, you don't think about, but it's in the background. So how do you talk to recruiters about things? You learn about the things. And so I could talk to you guys about like Aboriginal Australian people because I took a class on that. Or I could talk to you about the sociology of education because I learned about it. And so that's super important because you get to connect with people on something that they might like. And you get a cool piece of paper that says you know stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of like the end goal, but I mean, it's whatever. But the cons are kind of grades and exams are usually a joke. I'm really against grades and tests in general because I'm bad at tests. I overthink a lot. But I had a class recently, I had to go 70% of your total for the midterm and final. And it's like, dude, what? What is that even, like, what? But they could also be extremely impractical and hands-on, or and not hands-on, I mean, sorry. And I mean kind of like they teach you theories about it, but it's like, okay, well, now what? And it can become extremely time-consuming if you let it. And we're going to get into that more. And sometimes if you don't get scholarships and grants and stuff like that, I was really blessed to get a decent amount of grants and scholarships. I think I'm about 20,000 in the hole. It's not as bad as I've heard people go upwards of 100,000. But it could be unaffordable and overall a headache financially. So even though I have those grants, Paul constantly bugs me about paying for the school. So it's one of those things. So how do I approach it, right? You want to start by doing a deep dive and understanding where you want to be in cybersecurity and why you started. So everybody wants to do cybersecurity, but what specialty do you want to do? It's like engineering, right? Like I want to be an engineer. Okay, cool. Do you want to do electrical, mechanical, industrial? And that's going to take a lot of thought, right? You want to think back to why you started. So when I started in like kind of tier 1 help desk almost when I was young, I wanted to help people. And I got into like anonymous and hacktivist groups and stuff like that. So I had to think like, maybe I want to do, blue team and red team operations and kind of attack people but also defend against it. So then once you understand where you want to go, you want to start narrowing it down to exactly what you need to get there. So I want to be a pen tester, so I've got to get really good at X, Y, and Z, and oh my God, I'm almost over time. But you want to set boundaries for yourself in school. So something I had to do recently was I had to set up 25 GRE tunnels, and it's like, I don't have to do that yet because I don't want to be a network engineer. So let me step out and go to these networking events. And this is the last thing that I really want to touch on is most internships don't care about your GPA. And they require a 3.0 minimum. Some I've even seen 2.5. So it's like a C average or something like that. You guys can all do that, I believe. And this is just a list of my personal prioritization. And it's kind of in somewhat of an order. Not really. This is something I came up with kind of last second. But you can kind of see like school and grades is really low on there. Making enough money is one of those things that I try to make enough for my rent, so that works. And if I had to do it again, I would upskill via Hack the Box, try Hack Me, CTFs. Certs would be kind of cool. Create a cool personal website. Looking at internship programs like Explore Microsoft, Deloitte Discovery, all those things. And I really want to dig deep and try to find communities early around, because I found them in my junior year, but if I had to do it again, I would definitely look like in my high school years because I was so annoying at that time and I would have been so annoying at the events. And so these are the key takeaways right here. Internships, they're a great experience for students looking for something realer than theory. Take school for what it is and realize that perfect grades are not mandatory or flattering. Specialize early and dig deep and just dive deep and figure out why you're doing the thing. You want to have passion for what you do. Really, if you're not passionate about the field, I would suggest looking somewhere else. And don't let anybody take that away from you. If you like, in my case, offensive security, always try to break stuff, always try to be annoying, be a nuisance. And then build up your resume, personal branding network. They're keys to setting up your success and finding those internships and stuff like that. So definitely do that. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you guys have any questions, feel free to speak up now. And then it's my Discord and LinkedIn. Go ahead.
Do you have plans after graduation?
I don't have a job lined up. I didn't get a return offer from Discover, but it's one of those things where I could now say like, hey, I did compliance when I was, in high school or in college. So yeah, hopefully some company picks me up and values those. Anybody else? No? Cool. Well, that's my talk. That's my LinkedIn right there. So feel free to scan it and connect with me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.